All right, welcome everybody to our course on the Torah of Reuven Margolies. This is our summer semester, and it's nice to be back with you. I wasn't teaching last semester, so this is it's exciting to be back. Okay, a little bit of background. Um, I'm a big fan of Reuven Margolies, Zatzal, of him, his Torah. That all fits really well with Livnos College for Women, the culture, because I am familiar with Rabbi Margolies because of my Rebbe, Rav Herzog. Close to 40 years ago, he introduced me to the Torah of Reuven Margolies. And I bought a few Svarim and I've been buying them ever since. So this just seems appropriate. Sometime after Rav Herzog mentioned in Shir, once or twice, he was talking about the power of Rabbi Margolies' Torah and the genius of his Svarim. And then sometime later, when we returned to the United States, I was listening to a lecture from Rav Beryl Wine. He should rest in peace. And he was talking about Rabbi Margolies in the course of describing the 19th, 20th centuries and the Talmidei Chachamim in Europe. So he started to discuss Rabbi Margolies, and he had a lot of interesting things to say. Anyway, I've been buying his farm ever since. I certainly don't own a complete library. Rabbi Margolies authored some 55 svarim on every possible topic in Torah that you can imagine, everything. I don't own all of them. I own a lot of them, and they're challenging at times. They cover hashkafa and halacha. They cover learning, like in other words, Gemara learning. They cover mystical stuff. They cover everything. He has a perush on the Haggadah. He has a commentary on the Zohar. He works through the Zohar line by line, and he shows where in the conventional, the normative Torah sources that we have, like the Gemara specifically, the source for all the statements in the Zohar. He's everywhere. So in fact, he was awarded the Israel Prize by the state of Israel, I think in the late 1950s, as an expression of just recognition of the uh, encyclopedic nature of his output, his literary output, incredible. All right, let me try to motivate a little bit why we're interested in him and what we're going to do with his Torah. We're going to be dealing specifically with one of his books, and it's this one. This is my version of sharing screen. Ta-da! See, that's high tech. And a lot of people are going to scoff, but it gets the job done. Watch. It's perfect. Okay. Hamikra v'Hamasora. These Sfarim are put out by Mossad Harav Kook. We're going to be focusing on that particular Sefer for a number of reasons, and I'm going to make that clear as we go along. I think it's a wonderful introduction to him and to what he does. Let me explain to you my fascination with him. You have all grown up in an era and in an environment in which orthodoxy reigns supreme. Baruch Hashem, that's what a bracha. Not all of us have had that bracha. Some of us remember a time and a whole bunch of places where orthodoxy was embattled and where the inviolate nature, the prestige, the authority, the kedusha of the Torah was not taken for granted at all. I remember one time having a chilling conversation with a fellow. I'm going to try to be respectful because we'd like to invite everybody to Livnos College for Women. The courses, the Torah is beautiful stuff, and I wouldn't want to antagonize anyone or make anybody feel uncomfortable. Um, my natural inclination would be to speak a little more strongly or harshly, but I'm going to rein myself in, and I'll tell you only that the fellow with whom I had this interaction, this is a lot of years ago. It's over 40 years ago. He was a student at JTS. JTS stands for, they call it the Jewish Theological Seminary. I don't really find a lot that's Jewish about it. Certainly not in the sense in which we understand Jewish or to do with Torah, things like that. But he was a student at JTS and he pelted me with challenges. It was in a social context. We were at someone's Shabbos table and he started piling on the challenges to the Gemara. He had countless examples. And in the course of the conversation, what became clear to me was that his teachers at that institution were supplying him with this material. And they were examples from the Gemara itself, examples that made the Gemara look ridiculous. It made the Gemara's conclusions or the actual text of the Gemara, it was untenable. It just didn't make any sense. And there was something that was wrong here. So the point that he was building towards, the conclusion was, he reached some point when he was like, basically, ta-da, this is what you Orthodox people revere. Its authenticity its authority is supreme in your eyes. It's internally inconsistent and at times downright absurd. And emendations need to be made, corrections, deletions. There need to be omissions, revisions. We know better now. That was the nature of his challenge. I I listened to what he had to say and I pushed back. Obviously, I made it clear to him that I rejected his premise and the examples that he gave. Were we to work through them, I could have shown him, I could have demonstrated without a doubt that he was misunderstanding or that there was something deeper going on. Chazal wrote in a way that for those people who are uninitiated, they're not welcome. Chazal don't give people the decoder ring. That's the nature of the Torah Shebaal Peh, a famous medrash. We've discussed it in times past in other courses. The Medrash describes a conversation in which Moshe Rabbeinu said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu as he was recording the Torah Shebaal Peh, he said, can I just write, can I write this a little clearly? Can I just write this in a way that it will be accessible to everybody who looks at it? The way HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you're having me record these things, it's not really very inviting and it's not really very accessible and it's subject to a lot of misunderstanding. And it could be the subject of a lot of ridicule. Can I just write it in a straightforward kind of way? And HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, no, absolutely not. Absolutely not. He said, you write it the way I tell you, because I don't want it to be accessible. I want those people who are Yisrael proper, I want them to be able to access the Torah of Yisrael, the Razeh Yisrael, the secrets of the Jewish people. That's what the Torah Shebaal Peh is. Kadosh Baruch Hu said, there's going to be a time, an amazing medrash, it's unbelievable. And it was written before this actually happened in history, but it did. Kadosh Baruch Hu said, there will come a time when a nation will arise and they're going to say, we're Yisrael, we're Israel, we're the new Israel. The covenant has been given to us, the covenant of Israel. Hashem said, when that happens, so then you can look to them and you can say, really? Do you have the Razeh Yisrael, the secrets of the Jewish people? Do you have the Torah of Yisrael, the real understanding of the Torah? Hashem said to Moshe, you write it the way it is. Now, who would ever dare? Imagine the theological arrogance, the presumption, the gall. Who would have the audacity to lie and present themselves and say, we're Israel? We're the new Israel. That's the doctrine. That's what the Catholic Church says, that they're the new Israel. God forbid, God forbid. Forgive me for even for saying such a thing. Shouldn't even say the words. When that happens, when you look and you see in the writings of the church fathers, when they're trying to understand, it says on the first day of the seventh month will be a day of blowing. When you look in the writings of the church fathers, they say this. They say the Hebrews have a tradition that this is a reference to a ram's horn. The Israelites, the Hebrews, the Jews, because they don't know what any of it means. And at times in their holy writings, they consider them holy. To us, they're garbage. But in what they consider to be their scripture, they have to explain all kinds of things in the Tanakh. They have to reference them and they have to take a stand. And they made their mark. They let it be known. They said this, it means this, it means this. They build off of it. Only afterwards in history, that's not a coincidence that the Torah Sheba'al Peh was allowed to be recorded. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi recorded it because of that Horah Shah, but he recorded it after they had more or less locked themselves into their positions. Then forevermore the world looks and says, right, well, the Hebrews have a tradition. So that's sometimes the challenging, the frustrating nature of the Torah Sheba'al Peh. By the way, even when Rabbi Yehuda Nasi allowed himself to record the Mishnah, and then later in another era, the Chachmei Yisrael, Ravina Rav Ashi, edited and they published the Gemara. So when all those things happened, even then they kept it in a cryptic kind of way. Unless you have the decoder ring, unless you go to somebody who is a Talmid Chacham of a previous generation and they have lots of Torah, they can initiate you into it, and then you get it. Then you know what it really means. So they wrote it, even when they recorded it, they wanted to remain true to that, the nature of the cryptic nature of the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the elusive nature, that unless you go to somebody who is authoritative, who's the real deal, someone who's really a Talmid Chacham, as Yer Shamayim, and who lives it, and is a model, an exemplar of all the things that the Torah is telling us to be. If you don't go to such a person, you don't find a source like that, you're just not going to get it. And the truth is, it's not just for the Catholic Church, it's for anybody. Ada Yom Hazeh. I see at times people write things and they say, look at what the Jews write in their Talmud, and the anti-Semites use it as propaganda. They take a few lines out of context, they quote a piece without knowing what it means. It's elusive, and it doesn't reveal its soul to just everybody. This fellow from JTS, he turned to people, he was drinking from poisoned waters, and his teachers, they weren't trying to understand the Torah Sheba'al Peh. They were trying to undermine it, and they were enemies no less, probably much more, than the Catholic Church, when everybody was struggling, if they could just get control of the Razeh Yisrael. So I had a conversation with that fellow, and it didn't really go anywhere. I made it clear to him that I categorically I rejected everything that he was saying, and I said to him, "It's a shame. It's a shame to me. It's heartbreaking that you've never been exposed to real Torah. You've never been exposed to real Torah. I wish you had been. If you ever want to, I offer. I extend an invitation to you. We could learn together. We could do something." He obviously didn't take me up on it. I chalked the experience of I walked away and bewildered, sad, angry, all those kinds of things. A year or two later, I found myself in an exact same situation with another person. They were a student at that same institution. Not going to give it a name, not going to name it anymore because we've already given it too much airtime. But he was in that same institution and he started doing the same kind of tricks, and he started bringing up the exact same examples. And they are very, very troubling examples. I will tell you that. To the uninitiated, those who don't understand, to look at these passages in the Talmud, to look at them and say, what? On the face of it, they look crazy. They look inexplicable. They've got to be wrong. There's something going on here. Terrible, terrible. And to someone who is not rock solid in their emunas chachamim, in their understanding of who Chazal were, and the power and the authenticity, the kedusha, the perfection, the divine nature, the infinite kedusha and perfection of the Torah Sheba'al Peh and the Torah Sheba'al Self. Without those kinds of things, a person could very easily be knocked off of their equilibrium. I say that to you, and that was, those were a couple of experiences. I've had it many times since then. I've spoken with people from that institution and from other they describe themselves as Jewish. They're, different sects, and none of that's true. There's no different sects. There's Torah, true Judaism, and then there are people who are traitors. They're kofrim. They are out. They can call themselves Jewish, but people from other so-called Jewish institutions have challenged me at times. We did college outreach. We lived in places not in, frum neighborhoods and frum cities. We lived in North Carolina. I was the rabbi at Duke University. We're doing kiruv. There were many, many times that people, Jews, non-Jews, non-halachic clergy people, people who call themselves rabbi, they would throw up these kind of objections to me. And there were a lot of them. When I was younger, I remember a time I was sitting in class, went to the Hebrew Academy of Greater Hartford, and my Rebbe, he should rest in peace, my sixth grade Rebbe, he was teaching us, we were looking at something in the Gemara, and it quoted a pasuk, and he said, that's not the exact quote of the pasuk. And he said, that's not really the pasuk. He said, the pasuk look is sort of like that, but it's not that. The Gemara doesn't quote it properly and accurately. What? When I was listening to those people later on in early adulthood, I was taken back to that episode where Rabbi Greenbaum, alav shalom, where he said, that's not the exact quote, the Gemara, but the Gemara say it's like it's a paraphrase of a pasuk. And I remember that. And like even when I was a kid, when I was 11, that was troubling to me. The Gemara is approximate. What are we talking about? What are we talking about? I've spent a lot of years learning, and I've had a chance to see like the beauty, the depth, the profundity of Torah learning, of the Gemara especially, its perfection, like the genius. We've been learned together in those courses, like the courses on the Chakiras, the Brisker Derech, and we were looking at that, and we were doing a deeper dive into how Gemara learning can be done. So those of you who were in that course with me, we walked that path, and like we know what the Gemara is capable of, and like we've only skimmed the surface. We've only skimmed the surface. And yet, those questions, they kind of hang in there and they needed to be addressed. They needed to be addressed. I remember like, throughout my life, I mentioned before, those of you who have that luxury, it's an interesting luxury. I think it's wonderful not to be in places where you're embattled and people are ridiculing your orthodox beliefs and your orthodox practice. It's a real bracha not to have to deal with that. But there's something that comes, perhaps those kind of things make us stronger or something. But I remember throughout my life living in different places. I lived in Syracuse, New York for a year. I worked at General Electric as an electrical engineer, and there were Jews in the community. I bumped up against them, and right away, you're Orthodox. I see your yarmulke, and like the challenges began. It's been like that always. I put myself, as I mentioned, to those kind of places, like doing that college outreach, missionaries, and the non-Jewish clergy with whom I worked. I was a member of the religious life staff. We'd have meetings. There were challenges all the time. There's a lot of people badgering us, questioning the beauty of that Torah that we love so much. And into that mess, and this was early in my life, I'm grateful for that. A lot of years ago, came two Torah giants, and they were Rav Avigdor Miller, Zatzal. Rabbi Miller, I was introduced to him when I was young, and I listened. At one point, I owned over 600 of his tapes, and I listened to them over and over and over again. And also Reuven Margolies, Zatzal. Those Torah teachers, there are other people who do something along the lines. They do something similar, but differently in different realms. But what the two of them did, they were willing to address all those questions. A lot of times there are those questions from the outside world. People are making fun of the Torah, they're challenging it, they're saying all kinds of things. And in the yeshiva itself, in yeshiva proper, the Rosh Yeshiva, they don't address that kind of stuff. We leave that world of sheker behind. And in the world, within the walls of the yeshiva, it's the olam ha'emes. And we don't deal with sheker that's out there in the world. Because what do we care what they think? There's a lot of wisdom in that. It only goes so far. And what I received from Rabbi Miller and from Rabbi Margolies, I had the zechus to speak to Rabbi Victor Miller a couple of times in my early adulthood. Rabbi Margolies passed away in 1971. I never had a chance to interact with him, unfortunately. Passed away on Zion Elul, I believe that's his yard site, a long time ago. So I only know him from his Torah, from his Sfarim. But Rabbi Miller was not afraid. He was the first person I encountered who would say something like this. This is an exact quote. He mentioned something, some kind of canard, something from the outside world that they say about Torah, about some aspect of Torah and how silly it is. And Rabbi Miller said, he is a Meshuggah, but the question is, why is he a Meshuggah? Why is he? When I first heard that, it was the first time he had addressed something from the outside world. It's crazy, but why is it? And there's something very powerful that can come from being willing to address their objections, and to say, how does a Torah respond to that? Because sometimes they're out there in the world and they're trying to make fun, they're trying to rob the Torah of its kedusha, of its authority, of its divine nature. They have agendas like that. But sometimes people are just confused and they just don't know. They just don't know. And they're honestly seeking and they think, wait, this doesn't make sense. And they could be asking with integrity. They could be asking not to attack, but because they're curious and they're wondering. And if they had a good answer, maybe they would act on it. And Rabbi Miller was the first person in my life who said, I'm going to respond. I'm going to acknowledge that there are questions out there and I'm going to respond to them. To me, as a young man, it was shocking and it was so happy to hear. He equipped me with the answers that I would need. And we've discussed that in the Torah and Science course, for example. That was the first course that I taught for Live Nose College for Women. But Rabbi Miller wrote books about the sheker of geology, the claims of the geologists and of evolution, things like that. He was so knowledgeable about it. I mentioned this in the course way back that I had the opportunity at Duke to debate with a professor of geology, a woman whose last name was also Friedman, not Frum at all. In fact, anti-Frum. She was hostile to my Orthodox beliefs, and we had a debate, and armed with Rabbi Miller's Sfarim and what I had learned from him on that topic, I was able to debate her, and the general consensus was that I prevailed. She was saying, "Well, yeah, no, that's true. Well, yeah, that's true. That's true." That was a shocking thing, like, to be able to take that argument, to take that, that questioning, the back and forth, and to take it into their world and to prevail on their terms in the halls of academia. Unbelievable. And that was Rabbi Miller. That was also Rabbi Margolies. What Rabbi Margolies does in this Sefer, what you're going to find is that a lot of the essays, there are 24 of them, not all of them, but a lot of them are constructed like this. They claim such and such. Now you have to remember that Rabbi Margolies, he died in 1971. He was born in the late 1800s. He was writing in a time in which things like Bible criticism, Wellhausen's theories, all this kind of stuff that wanted to deprive, right, that the Torah wasn't of divine origin. It was made by a bunch of people, different documents, different writers. They pieced it all together. It was a hodgepodge. There's a J document, the E document, the D document, all those kinds of things. That was reigned supreme in the world of the universities, in the world of academia, the intellectuals. Everybody accepted that. And if you didn't accept that, well, then you were a fool. You were a superstitious fool who refused to be scientific, refused to be enlightened. If you're not going to be intelligent, if you're going to just be dealing with your superstitious beliefs, we can't even have a conversation. That was the tone that was the era in which he lived. It was like that. And orthodoxy, Torah was embattled. The degradation of Torah was unbelievable. And Rabbi Margolies marshaled all of his Torah. And in these essays, you'll see he'll say this. He'll say, they claim. It would be hard for me to tell you what percentage of them, so many of the things that he says, I heard from those two different men with whom I spoke that time. They were recycling old canards, old claims, attacks against Torah, specifically against the Talmud, And they were getting it from their teachers who had gotten it from Tameh sources, non-Jewish sources. Rabbi Margolies, when I was reading this Sefer, I was like, oh my gosh, here are the answers. Here are the answers to those challenges posed by those people I mentioned that I interacted with them. Here were the answers. He'll say in a number of the essays, the Bible critics claim this. And with his wisdom, with his wit, there are times that he becomes very sarcastic. And he was like, this is unbelievable, unbelievable. But really, the tone of it, what he's saying is, we need to know how to respond. If we're Torah Jews and we acknowledge the perfection of all of these Torah sources that we have, of this lifestyle we've been given, of the Ol Malchut Shamayim, all of it, this whole package deal that we've been given, we have to understand, why are they wrong? Why are they wrong? And that's the nature. That's what these essays, a lot of them, that's what they're about. I mentioned in the course description that Rabbi Margolies, and I talked to you before about, he wrote a Perush on Masechta Sanhedrin. It's authoritative. If people are serious Talmidei Chachamim and they're learning in yeshivas, if they're learning Masechta Sanhedrin, so they have Margolios Hayam. They have to. How would they be able to learn the Sefer properly without his insights? If someone's learning the Zohar, they want to know, where is this found in the Torah's Nigla, in the Gemara, in the Bavli, in the Yerushalmi, in the Midrashim? Where do these things all appear? So they're going to look at the Nitzotze, Nitzotze HaZohar. I think that's what the Sefer of the title is, but from Rabbi Margolies. But this is a sefer that is polemic in nature. It's important for us as Torah Jews to know it, but it has a different tone, and the audience is different. I saw one critique from a Godel, the Yisrael back in Europe, where he said, talking about Rabbi Margolies' his Sefer Yesod HaMishnah Varichata, the foundation, the composition of the Mishnah. How is the Mishnah written? What were the constraints, the parameters under which Rabbi Yehuda Nossi and his team of Talmidei Chachamim were working? They were constrained by what design parameters? Rabbi Margolies wrote a book, and it's unbelievable. And this Talmid Chacham reviewed it, and in a letter to somebody, I found an excerpt from this letter where he said, it's unbelievable. It's as serious a sefer as could ever be. And it's important stuff. The insights, the chidushim that he brings, his understanding, his insights into the nature of the composition of the Mishnah, incredible. He said, but why did he write it in such a popular style? In other words, it's accessible to lay people. It's as if someone were writing a book that people could get off the newsstand, rack. They could just take this book and read it as a popular book. Like, why not write it as a sefer? Well, Rabbi Margolies, he had an agenda. He was trying to invite people to come back to Torah. We're going to take that invitation. The greatness of Rabbi Margolies, there are a number of stories around. There's one that I found many years ago. I saw it in some sefer or other, and it was describing that Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach was giving shir one day in Bayit Vagan, and Kol Torah, is that the yeshiva? I don't recall. I think that's what it is. But he was giving shir, and as he was giving shir, he happened to see out the window that Rabbi Margolies was walking into the door of the yeshiva. So Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach stood up, and he said to the Talmidim, you see that Jew over there? He has no idea how much he knows. He doesn't know how much he knows. He knows everything. That's really the only way to describe it. He knows everything. I hope we'll have occasion, as we're looking at these essays, that there are times where he'll say something, then he brings a footnote. In the footnote, there are hundreds of citations, illustrations from Kol Torah Kula, everywhere. It's unbelievable. He had all of it. I won't insult him by saying that he had a photographic memory, because it's so insulting. It takes someone's exertion, their yigi of a lifetime, and they're just like, they have a gift. They have a gift. People produce themselves. They make themselves into people who have a photographic memory by doing it so many times, by learning it over and over and over again. But you'll see in some of these things, when he's describing something, he'll say, and it's kind of ironic that this particular Amora should say it, because he's the one who said it over, and he'll pull out of his hat the source from somewhere. There was no Bar Ilan database. There was no search for keywords. There was nothing. He knew it all, and he had all of it at his fingertips. I'm going to try real hard to give you a sense of that. I was mentioning to Rav Herzig the other day we were speaking, and I told him that I'm teaching this course this semester, the Torah of Rav Reuven Margolies. And I said, Rebbe introduced me to him a long time. He says, I remember discussing him. He says, we've talked about it over the years. He said, I have a practice. I go with a friend of mine. He told me that he's gone to Rabbi Margolies' kever. He's gone there on the Yortzeit, say Tehillim. Rabbi and Mrs. Margolies did not have children. And Rabbi Herzig told me that it occurred to him at some point, a long time ago. It said no one to remember them, to say a kapitel Tehillim, to say Kaddish, things like that. So he went with a chaver, and they went to the grave, and someone was actually there. It turned out that it was a nephew, his wife's nephew, his nephew through his wife, and he survived the war. His parents were killed in the war, but he makes it a practice. He also goes on their yurt site. An older man, and he was, as I mentioned, a survivor. And they were talking a little bit, and he told them this story. I'll share this story with you. When they came, Rabbi and Mrs. Margolies, they left Europe, they came to Eretz Yisrael. It was in 1934 or 35. I don't remember. I think it was 34, but I'm not positive. So they made it a point. They were in different places in the country. Ultimately, they settled in Tel Aviv. He was the librarian in the Maimonides Library in Tel Aviv. That's how he made his living. Very understated person. But they came to Yerushalayim, I think it was, and they went to see Rav Avram Yitzchak Cohen Cook. They went to see Rav Cook. So they waited, and it was a little bit of a wait, and then they had a chance for an audience, and they walked in, and Rabbi Margolies said, my nomen is Reuven Margolies. So Rav Cook said, so Mrs. Margolies, the Rebbitzin said, Harav Reuven Margolies. She corrected him. So Rabbi Cook started, and he said, the Rav Reuven Margolies, who wrote all those Sfarim? And Rabbi Margolies said, yeah. Again, a very, yeah, quiet. Yeah, that right. I'm that guy. So Rav Cook said, excuse me 1 second. So he came back a minute later in his big day Shabbos with his, all the regalia, and he stood up and he made the bracha that one makes on a Talmud Chacham. He made it b'Shem Malchus. In the yeshiva world, Rav Wolbe talks about this, that people made the bracha Hashem gives of his chokhmah lireav. It's an amazing story, right? So about Rav Baruch Ber Leibowitz, he was the Talmud Muvak of Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, the Reb Chaim of Brisk, the creator, so to speak, of the Brisker Derech. Rav Baruch Ber was his Talmud Muvak, and Rav Shlomo Wolbe in the Shirei Chumash on Vayikra, he talks about the nature of Rav Baruch Ber, the kedusha of the man, the almost supernatural, not almost, the supernatural insight that he had, his connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and like he just lived on a different plane. And Rav Baruch Ber, and Rav Wolbe says that in the yeshiva world, they made the bracha on him. That bracha, one makes for Talmud Chacham, they said it without Shema Malchus. Without Shema Malchus. He said, Reb Chaim Ozer Grodzinski, they made the bracha b'Shema Malchus. Like he was a fundamentally different level. And it's not just someone like, oh, they're big. Not big. They have to be somebody who is out of this world. Out of this world. Reb Chaim Ozer was the Gadol Hador. He had the bracha. They made the bracha on him, b'Shema Malchus. Rav Cook said b'Shema Malchus on Rav Margolies. That is the man whose Torah we're going to meet this semester. In one of the courses, I don't remember now which one it was. I think it was, and we're doing Avos, we did that 2-semester course. I talked in the beginning about the nature of learning. Real learning has 2 aspects to it. It has the aspect of the technical precision, all the skills for analyzing a text and knowing how to deal with the information, to categorize it, to process it appropriately. And also what's needed is that spark of creativity. Some people have one without the other. By Margolies in his farm, he has both. He'll honor all the technical processes, and at the end of each essay, or at the appropriate time, he'll punctuate it with, we can suggest with this, and then he will read a piece of Torah. He'll translate, he'll interpret in a way which is spectacular. It turns the whole thing on its ear. It's shocking. So that's what we're going to do this semester, Yirtzeh Hashem. Let's turn to the first Paris, the first chapter of his book. It's on Nusach Aseret Dibrot Beluchot. I'm going to constrain myself. I'm going to read the Sefer. You've been given the text. The first essay, the first three, and then also I think it's essays at 13. Let me just check. 13. They actually form a unit. If you know any one of them, you have a lot of stuff. If you know 1, 2, 3, and 13, you have a very, very comprehensive understanding on a particular topic. The Gemara says like this. There are some typos in this Sefer. I will try to restore them. Shal Rabbi Chanina ben Agel. It's not Egol, Agel. At Rabbi Chia bar Abba. So Rabbi Chanina ben Agel, he asked Rabbi Chia bar Abba. Rabbi Chia bar Abba is an important personality. He's an Amora. He's someone significant. And this piece of Torah, it's an excerpt from Tractate Bava Kama, 55a. It's the end of 54b, running into 55a. This piece of Torah, Rabbi Margolies will come back to it in strange places throughout this Sefer, and he mines it out for different dimensions. Every time he comes back, he comes up with something else, which is like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. So Rabbi Chanina ben Agel asked Rabbi Chia bar Abba, he said, "Mipnei ma b'dibrot harishonot lo nemar behem tov, u'b'dibrot ha'achronot nemar behem tov." Why is it that in the nusach, the formulation of the first tablets, the formulation of the 10, right, Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 commandments, for lack of a better translation right now, in the first formulation of them, the word tov does not appear. Masha'en kain b'dibrot ha'achronot, in the second version, nemar behem tov, the word tov does appear. So you'll find these two. The first one is going to be in Parshas Yisro, in the book of Shemos, right? That's the giving that describes the giving of the Torah. On Shavuos, they received the 10 commandments. That's the Dibrot HaRishonot. Whereas the Dibrot HaAchronot, they received on Yom Kippur. And you see in the footnote, it says just that. The Parshas Yisro, it says whatever. Parshas Veschanan, it says whatever. And you see the difference that it says in the version in Devarim, now I just want you to notice that I'm going to read the pasuk to you, and I'm using this chumash. Just hold on to that fact. You'll remember I'm looking in this chumash. That's very significant. It says, it's chapter 5, so to speak, pasuk tet zayin, kabed et avicha ve'et imecha. Kasher tzivcha Hashem Elokecha leman ya'arichun yamecha. Here we go. Uleman yitav lach. Uleman yitav, that it should be good. It should be tov lach for you. Al adam asher Hashem Elokecha noten lach. That phrase, uleman yitav lach, occurs in the book of Devarim. In Shemot, it does not. It does not. So, Amrlo, so Rabbi Chia bar Abba responded, and he said to him, Ad shata shoaleni, lama nemar behem tov. Before you ask me why it says tov in the version in Devarim, the verse I just read you, shoaleni im nemar behem tov im lav. Why don't you ask me if the word tov appears? She'eni yodea, im nemar behem tov im lav. Because I don't know. I don't know if the word tov appears in the formulation, in that second formulation. In fact, what? What does that mean? Well, I'll tell you. If you look, it says this, right? This is the translation that appears on Sfaria. They have some allowance, they have permission to bring an English translation. And he says, Rabbi Chia bar Abba responded, before you ask me why the word tov appears in the right in the second formulation, why, asking if the word good, tov, is actually stated there or not. Since I am not sufficiently proficient in my knowledge of the biblical verses to remember the precise wording, and I don't know if the word tov is stated there or not. Okay? I'm not sufficiently proficient in my knowledge of the biblical verses to remember the precise wording. And I don't know if the word good is stated there in Parshat Ve'et Hanan. It's stated there or not. He says, what you should do, instead of asking me, Kalach Eitzel Rabbi Tanchum bar Chaniloi, Shai Ragel Eitzel Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Go to Rabbi Tanchum bar Chaniloi. He is a student of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Shahaya Baki Ba'agada. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi was an expert in Haggadah, and it's hashkafic kinds of stuff. Azel Ligabe. So Rabbi, excuse me, Rabbi Chanina ben Agel went to Rabbi Tanchum bar Chaniloi, and he asked him that question. He posed the question, why in the first version no tov, the word tov doesn't appear. In the second version, the word tov does appear. Amralo, so he said to him, Ho'il v'sofan l'hishtaber. Since they were destined, the first tablets, to be destroyed, to be broken, HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't put the word tov on them. Had the word tov been on them and then subsequently destroyed, it would have boded ill, terrible for the Jewish people. That's the piece of Gemara. Says Rabbi, excuse me, Margolies, Midivrei Rabbi Chia bar Abba elu. From these words of Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Shebahem he'id al atzmo ki eno yodea im hadibrot achronot haktuvot b'Mishnah Torah, in which he testified about himself that he did not know about the second set of luchot that are written, they're recorded in the book of Devarim, whether katuv yitav imlo. He testifies about himself that he didn't know if that word appeared there. So from these words themselves, hochichu betosafot. Now, understand what this means. Someone who's looking at this, these are the Amoraim, and they are the sources for us of the Torah Shebaal Peh. The Torah Shebaal Peh comes to us from the Tanoim through the Amoraim to us. And here, this knowledge, Rabbi Chia bar Abba, a giant, one of the greatest of the Amoraim, he says, I don't remember the pasuk. I'm not familiar with the pasuk. That is very, very troubling. When we lived in Linden, New Jersey, I was the rabbi of the shul there, right next door to Elizabeth, New Jersey. Rabbi Elazar Meir Teitz, Zatzal, he should rest in peace. It was a giant of Torah. If you said any three words anywhere in Tanakh, he could just keep going. I used to watch the students. They would challenge him at the JEC. They'd say three words, and he'd just keep going. It was unbelievable. Too bad Rabbi Chia bar Abba didn't know as much Torah as Rabbi Teitz. Rabbi Teitz knew he knew Kol Torah Kula. Rabbi Chia bar Abba was an Amora. There's a lot of layers between Amoraim and us. Rishonim can't argue on Amoraim. Achronim can't argue on Rishonim, can't argue on Amoraim. And Rabbi Chia bar Abba says, I don't know the pasuk. That's problematic for so many reasons. And this is a piece of Torah that is quoted, a piece of Gemara that is quoted many, many times. When pundits, are talking about the spotty knowledge, these are the bearers of the authoritative sources of the Torah, of the oral Torah. These are their Torah teachers. There's a lot more to that skepticism and that ridicule, but we'll leave it at that. But he quotes an interesting source. It's kind of funny. He says, from these words, hochichu betosafot, the Balei Tosfos in Bava Basra, it's 113a. If you look in the Gemara in the Tosafot, Dibra Matchil Tarvaihu. The Tosafot, the Balei Tosafot proved ki lefamim lo hayu bekiyim bepsuke Torah, that the Amoraim didn't always know all the psukim in the Torah. That is not really correct. That's how the Tosafot begin. They say we see from here, and the Gemara in Baba Batra over there seems to be that various Amoraim are saying, like, I'm not sure. So the Balei Tosafot start out and they say they might not have known all of them. Then they go on subsequently to reject it and to say, to give another interpretation. But Rabbi Margolies has it that the Bali Tosfot are speaking for that skeptical world out there when they say they don't know all the psukim. Now that's very problematic. And Rabbi Margolies is going to raise three objections to that, three questions. That's understanding one. The Amoraim didn't always have to know. They didn't know all the psukim. Sometimes they just didn't know. They just didn't know. So he says, Milvad hazarut lachshov al echad mechachmei haTalmud, amudei haTorah, shelo haya mikushat biyadiat hachof dalet kitvei hakodesh haru'uyim liot shigurim al siftei kol tamid chacham. Besides the strange, this is so strange to think that one of the giants of the Talmud, the pillars of the Torah, they weren't adorned with a fluent knowledge of all 24 books of the written Torah. Those are supposed to be fluent on the lips of every Torah scholar, even to today. So that's question one, which is how can we attribute ignorance to someone like this, to an Amora? He says, milvad that though, gam milvad zeh, besides that mafli, it's astounding in another way. Hein zehu mikra mali b'Torat Moshe. This is an often a pasuk. It's an out and out open sentence in Torat Moshe. V'halo sifrei Torah mitzuyim ayu b'batei Yisrael. People had access to Chumashim, to Sifrei Torah in those days. V'lamadacha et Rabbi Chanina ben Agel lo tarach la'ayim b'sefer. Why didn't he exert himself to get up and walk across the room, open up an Aron Kodesh and take out a Sefer Torah, or take a stone chumash off the shelf and open up and look at it? This is a degree of laziness that's absolutely shocking. Lama dachat Rabbi Chanina ben Agel. Why did he push him off and say, go somewhere else? V'lo tarach la'ayim b'sefer. The od sha'al kol kazeh amru chachmei haTalmud. When every other time that we see in the Talmud that someone is asked the question, Amru Chachmei Talmud, you know what they said? They said, Nete Sefer v'nechzeh. Bring a Sefer Torah over here and let's look inside and find out. Let's look. So he's now posed two questions. The two questions are based on a question of his ignorance and his laziness. What's going to be now, I'm going to leave this for you for homework. I'd like you to look it over and try to read it on your own. If you can't, I'll be happy to read through it with you. But it brings two examples. He says, "V'yeter mizah anachnu motzim b'Shabbat." More than this, in other words, it wouldn't take a lot of effort for him to do just that, to find out the answer. Look in the pasuk, look on a page, look it up. It's what do we say it was 5:16? You can find it pretty quickly in a chumash. Much more effort goes into. We find in Tractate Shabbat. They said this. The teaching says avot malachot arba'im chasar achat. The number of right, avot malachot, the main categories of creative labor which are forbidden on Shabbat. There are 39 of them. 39 of them. Keneged me. Where's that come from? That number. So Rabbi Yonatan Rebbe Elazar said that he received this from Rabbi Shimon bar Yossi ben Lekunya, who said that every time some variation of the word malacha appears in the Torah, in the Chumash, malacha, malachto, malechet, anytime a reference to malacha, there's a reference like that. If you add them up, there's 39 of them. And that's anchored in the Torah. I'll leave that for Professor Elisheva Friedman to describe the nature of those kind of derivations and things like that. But there are 39 of them, and that signals to us that that's how many avot malachot, those categories. There are 39 categories. So the question came up by Rav Yosef. So Rav Yosef asked, and he said, there's a pasuk that it said that Yosef came habaita lasot malachto. He came to do his work. It's a euphemism, or it's not. That's a machloket. It's a machloket in the Talmud. Miminyanahu olo. Is that one of the 39? So Abaya heard the question, and you know what he said? Velete Sefer Torah velimna. Bring a Sefer Torah. Let's look. We're going to go through the entire Chumash, and we're going to find out how many times a variation of the word malacha appears. Malacha, malachto, malachet. Let's look it up. Bring it. Amazing. I'm skipping a little bit. Gedola Mizu Kedushin. In Tractate Kedushin, it talks about the fact that the word, the vav, the letter vav in the word gachon is the halfway point in terms of letters of the Sefer Torah. So Rav Yosef asked these kind of questions. The vav of gachon, mehai gisa or mehai gisa? Which side is it on? The pivot, is it right after? Is it the pivot? What? So that's a lot of letters. There's over 304,000 letters in a Sefer Torah. So what did what was the answer he received? He said this, Nete Sefer Torah imninuhu. Bring a Sefer Torah, let's count. Let's count all the letters. That's a lot of work. Hare Shagam, Kishiyihi Torah Meruba Lavor al Kol Parshat Torah V'limnot Kol Tevot Misug Malacha Melechet Melachto V'gam Kishat Tzarech Limnot Kol Otiot Torah. If you have to go through the entire Torah, the entire Chumash, to find how many times the word, some variation of the word malach, or to count all of the letters, all those. Even so, with all that work, hayal hashoel v'hamit anyen, these people who were in pursuit of truth and a deeper understanding of the Torah, you know what they did? Lahotzi sefer Torah v'limnot. They would get down, roll up their sleeves, so to speak, and they'd start counting. They'd start figuring. Here, what a wimpy question. The amount of effort, minimal. All they would have to do is la'ayim beparshat yidul l'chol bar beirav. Every kid can look up in Sefer Devarim, find the right place, look at one pasuk, look up one word. V'hinei lo sagi de lo yada pasuk kitzurato. Not only didn't he know the word, that he didn't know the pasuk appropriately. Ha'im gam atzlut haya bashol v'anisha la'ayim sefer. They were too lazy. They were too lazy. Question 3. Question 3 says, "Velo od elisha misignon Rabbi Chia bar Abba." From the way he responded to the question, he said, "Ad shata shoaleni lama nemar behem tov, shoaleni im nemar behem tov im lav." Right? Before you ask me if it's like, why don't you ask me if I know? Well, that's an interesting formulation. The she'eni yodeh im nemar behem im lav, because I don't know if it appears. He says, "Yitra'eh ki gam tama al Rabbi Chanina ben Agel shelo ala bedaito lish'ol oto techila im yodehu eich katuv." He seems to be chastising him. Why don't it even occur to you that I might not know how it's written? As if the fault lies with Rabbi Chanina ben Agel. Like, what's wrong with you? Why did that occur to you? Why? Because you should be more respectful, not to embarrass me? Like, what's the nature of that? The whole thing is very strange, but somehow he finds something deficient, something wrong in the nature, in how the question was posed to him. I'm going to skip the next paragraph. The next paragraph is a description of Rabbi Chia bar Abba at his best, in which he was asked, out of the blue, cold asked by somebody, about a complex question in the Chumash itself. And without missing a beat, he turned around and he answered it. So Reb Margolies says, we're not talking about a doofus head here. We're talking about somebody, the Torah was at his fingertips, and he was able, when he was asked and put on the spot, he came up right away with the answer. And yet, here we have all of these objections against him. What's going on? The first understanding that, sometimes Amoraim didn't know psukim, obviously it's unsatisfying and it's insufficient and it's just plain wrong. Here's where Rabbi Margolies, this is the first time where he flexes his muscles. Amnam, but im nishcharer atzmenu, if we can free ourselves, throw off the mimosarot haregilut, the fetters, the shackles. We're so used to things, we take it for granted. Asher al yada nisbachachnu ad ko behavana divrei Rabbi Chia bar Abba ela. We've been shackled to this point. We have just taken things for granted, and it got us into a point where we had some understanding which was untenable. It's absurd on the face of it. But if we can throw those shackles, those fetters off ourselves, and we can look with new eyes, let's look with new eyes. Let's not be suckered as we've been up to this point. So many of his essays have that pivot where he says, let's be honest, and let's look with clear eyes. Let's not accept the propaganda of the world. Let's really understand what's going on. He says, Nimtza will find, Ki chakira nichbada he'ir Rabbi Chia bar Abba. a very, very deep, a profound chakira. Remember chakiras from our course on chakiras? He's asking a fundamental question. Chakira is two models. They're the pivot, the axis around which a discussion is taking place. There are two legitimate, very, very legitimate, compelling different models we could entertain. Rabbi Chia Bar Abba is proposing a chakira. She'el asher lipitrona hutzrach bal agada, v'lo yodea mikra bilvad. For whose solution, not someone who just knows Torah, is required. No, we need someone who is a bal agada, a deep philosopher, someone who knows the hashkafa of the Torah, and not just someone who's yodea mikra bilvad, who knows the psukim. You can't get this kind of information by taking the stone chumash down from the shelf, opening up and saying, ta-da, there's the word. The word tov is there. The word tov is there. I'm going to just start us out, and we'll conclude this next time, and then we're going to run right into chapters 2, 3, ultimately 13. He says, Yodim anachnu ki yeshnam kama shinuyim misignon hadibrot haktuvim beparshat Yitro, lesignon shekatuv beparshat ve'et Chanan. We know that there are lots of differences in style, in the formulation, the way things are written. There are differences between the first set of luchot that are written in Parshat Yitro, differences between that, the style there, and the style that appears in Parshat Ve'et Chanan. V'yadanu shehayu luchot rishonim. We know there was a first set of tablets, shenitnu ba'atzeret. They were given on Shavuot, the very first Shavuot. Vishnayim, and the second set, shenitnu b'yom HaKippurim. U'me'ata hein yesh lach kor. Now we can clear this chakira. The question is, here's side one. Nusach haluchot atzman nishtaveh, was the formulation, the words that were recorded on the two sets of luchot. There were two sets of luchot. The words that were written on them, were they nishtaveh? Were they identical? Were the exact same words recorded on the first set and on the second set? I.e., beluchot harishonim v'gam ba'achronim haya chakuk. They were engraved, the word nusach of Parshat Yitro. The way it was recorded in Shemot, that formulation appeared on the first set of luchot and on the second. V'ach kasher katav Moshe sefer Mishnah Torah az nishtana hanusach. But when Moshe recorded, when he wrote Sefer Devarim, he formulated it a little differently. What he wrote in the Chumash is not what was recorded on the second set of luchot. That is one side of the chakira. That's a possibility. And there are halachic opinions, authoritative opinions that say just that. Just that. Oh, or is it ki be'etzem haluchot haya shinui benuschaot, that in the two sets of luchot there were fundamental differences. The way it's recorded in Parshat Yitro, those are the words that appear on the first set of tablets. Be'etzem haluchot hayu shinui benuschaot, i.e., berishonim haya chakuk hanusach. On the first set of luchot was engraved the formulation asher beparshat Yitro, ube'achronim, and in the second luchot haya kenusach shekatuv beTorah beparshat ve'et Chanan. And the way it appears in Sefer Devarim, that's a faithful reproduction of what appeared on the second set of luchot. Rabbi Chia Bar Abba is clearing this shaila, this chakira. He's saying, I don't know which of these is correct. Now we started a few minutes late, so we've now gone to 1 hour, I believe exactly. I'm going to leave it right here because I'm trying to be more respectful this semester of people's time. And we will pick up, if you'd like, what I would propose that you do is to try to read the rest of it. We'll go through it very quickly. We'll make short work of it. And then like I said, we'll continue on in the other thing. But already, I hope you'll start to realize that, wait a second, what? If you looked at the verse, if you looked at the translation into English, right, the way it's said in English in Sfaria, don't use Sfaria, use Ala Torah. But in Sfaria, if you look, and it says, because he didn't know what the words were. Yeah, no. That's an ignorant understanding. That's a surface understanding. That person who could write that, who could say that, who could look at Rabbi Chia Bar Abba that way, they don't have the decoder ring. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu, this is the conversation when Moshe said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, can I just write it straight? Can I just be more clear? And Hashem said, no. If they don't deserve to know, they're not going to know. Rabbi Margolies said, Rabbi Chia Bar Abba said to Rabbi Hanina ben Agel, why are you taking things for granted? Remember that third question, the way he chastised him? Why are you taking things for granted? Don't you know that there's two possibilities? We'd have to resolve those first to be able to start thinking before you look at the words inside. Think to yourself, what's going on with this understanding that Rabbi Margolies just proposed, that Rabbi Chia Bar Abba was dealing with this chakira, that there was this question, was it this or was it this? Now look back at the nature of their exchange and see if you can make sense of the conversation between them. And see if you can, in your own mind, don't look at the word, don't, cheat and see the punchline just yet, but look at when he went finally to the fellow who had been the Talmud of Rabbi Tanchum, who had learned with Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, a Baal Agoda, and he said, because Sofan, right, Atidan lehishtaber, they were going to be broken, try to read this Chakira into those exchanges and see what you come up with. After you've given it some thought, if you want to read ahead, I welcome you to do that. What we'll do next week is we'll read the rest of this. It doesn't mean we're going to be done with this chapter because there are some interconnections with other places where Rabbi Margolies is going to reference this Gemara. I'll show you those from later on in the Sefer and some of the unusual insights that he comes up with. All right. Thanks for coming. Hello there.